So for this tutorial, we're going to be dealing with an object solve. Now, when you're dealing with multiple objects or cameras in one scene, you're going to have to start being a little bit more concerned about scale. Because you're going to want to make sure that things are moving naturally within the same space as one another. So if you mess with the scale of a frame, it's going to start solving in weird distances in camera space, which could lead to some funniness if somebody was going to be applying effects or something to, I don't know. Hey, this is Cal from the future right now. I forgot to show how to separate your trackers. Yeah, so I tracked everything all under my camera right now. I don't know why. Just felt like doing it. But what you want to do is create your object, come up to Shot, Add Moving Object, and now you have Camera 1 and Object 1. Now I'm going to select all the trackers that I want to move. By the way, what you could have done is you could have just created your object and then started tracking your points underneath that to begin with. But I'm not a smart man. So now that I've selected all my trackers, I can come over here, go to Object. It's going to ask me if I want to clone them, like duplicate them, which wow, I said that weird. Duplicate. Which I don't want to, so I'm going to hit no, so they just move over, and that's it. There we go, we have our new object that's ready to solve, and we have our camera that you can toggle through like so, or you can come up here, or you can hit O on your keyboard. Alright, back to the tutorial. So to kick this off, let's go ahead and solve the camera. Now I have a measurement for the window frame here, so I'm going to enter that in now. To enter in a distance between trackers within SYNTHEYES, select your first point and then Alt left click your second point, and now they are connected to one another. They're linked. It's hard to see, but there's a faint gray line connecting the 2 points. So with the first point selected, come over to your tracker tab and come down to Seed and Lock. Here you can see that we have a constraint amongst your trackers, and just below it we have our distance that we can enter. So I'm going to go ahead and type in, what's my measurement? I have 105.3 centimeters. I'm working in centimeters within SYNTHEYES. So now that I got that entered, I should be able to just go ahead and solve this, and the camera will come out with a realistic scale. So I'm going to make sure I have distortion checked off, and go. So let's just see if this did something that I like. The camera looks okay. I think the object did something kind of funny. Yeah, the object's a little bit goofy. So let's go over to the object itself. When you're dealing with multiple objects and cameras, you'll notice that you can actually disable one while the other stays on your other solver mode. For now, I'm going to solve them together. But camera 1 is going to stay on refine because I'm kind of happy with what this camera is doing. If I look in F3, you can see my distortion. I'm going to go and check out my beginning frames for my object solve. So if it acted funny, the best thing I could think of is to tell SYNTHEYES to choose 2 new starting frames of my choice, because every solve is kicked off with 2 frames, and then hopefully it found a good parallax within those 2 frames. So let's go with maybe something like this, and then I'll drag my end frame to an area where the object has rotated, and I'll hit go. And it looks like it got a pretty bad result. I'm going to undo that and just give something else a try. I can come over to these hints here, I call them. You can give it a direction, left, right, up, down, and whatever. This is how the camera moves between your 2 starting frames. So this is kind of an awkward object because it rotates. Typically a camera won't do this. A camera will push in or out or move left and right. But this object kind of rotates and does a lot of stuff. So let's just see what we can do if we start top down and cycle through a couple of these. This doesn't always work for me. Sometimes it does. Okay, so I'm not getting the best results with this, but let's jump into the more settings, and I'll be honest, I don't fully understand this. For now, I'm going to decimate the frames by 3, turn my max pass down to maybe 200 iterations. Let's go maybe 50 and see what happens if I hit solve. So it looks like I've gotten a closer result. I'm gonna turn off my decimations here, and let's switch the object to refine and see if I can hit go and get those last few frames. Okay, so you saw those decimated frames where there was some skipping going on. I turned that down, hit solved, and it appears that it filled in the gaps. I'm gonna be completely honest, I actually have no clue what any of that did. I fluked it off completely. So don't expect me to be able to explain that any further. I don't even know if it's right for me to go on with this tutorial because I don't know what I did. So now that we have this, let's go ahead and take a look at our F4 and see what the objects are doing in space. So you can see that the picture frame is absolutely massive, just like I said. So let's start to arrange things a little bit better so we can make out what's going on. But first, now that the frame is doing some nicer things, let's switch it to object as well. Oh, it looks like I already did. Cool. So now that the frame is on refine and so is the camera, I'm going to start adding in some more distortion values. If you start to check off too many at once, the amount of calculation SYNTHEYES is going with is extremely high, and due to these randomization stuff here like fuzz values and your passes, you're gonna start having a lot of really crazy stuff if you start using too much stuff up front too quickly. So now that I've gotten my solves and I've switched both to refine, I'm going to go and start adding in a couple more of these and seeing how they affect my solve. The reason I'm adding another one now is because I already know from my earlier runs of this shot that my frame here doesn't straighten out completely. If I drew a line from here to there, it doesn't exactly line up. I don't know if it's because it's bent, but I just know it doesn't work. So let's hit Shift G, and if I undo redo, you can see our distortion changed a little bit. Not much. I could go in and try to unlock many more of these parameters here. For now, let's just leave that on and see what happens. So, now that I have both solving, let me do a quick orientation of my scene, and then we're going to worry about the picture frame scale. So first, camera. I'm going to go to the lens tab, and I don't want to see the lens grid right now. It's kind of messy. So I'm just going to go View, Show Lens Grid Off. And let's go ahead and drop some lines. I'm not going to go into detail about this. I did in one of my earlier tutorials. Axis locks and... Wait, I don't remember. I did a tutorial on this. A couple, actually. If I find it, maybe I'll try to figure out if I can link it. So, now, let's go ahead and go Add Line. And I'm going to make my Z line point this way. Now, older versions of SYNTHEYES likes to flip this arrow. So when I let go and go on Z, it's going to face that way. That's what I want. It's just a weird thing with older SYNTHEYES. And now for a Y line, I like this here on Y, and now we got our two main lines. Everything else is parallel lines now. So this is the frame that I know likely isn't straight. And we're going to make this parallel to Y. And you can make sure that your ends are nice and snug. And you could see that there's a little offset here. I don't know if that's just my camera solve or if it's the actual build itself. It could be. You'll notice that a lot of architecture and people-made things in general just aren't always super straight, as you might expect. So let's get some more Z lines here. And let's get some X lines. I'm going to use the lines outside the building and hope that these buildings are parallel to my apartment. Because I don't really have any good X lines in this shot. I'm not going to go for this because there might be an incline in the ground and this might not be level. I'm going to go with this building over here. I don't know if it's any better, but you know, we're dealing with things as we go. Let's put in a third one. The more parallel lines that you add, the more that SYNTHEYES is going to average out the solution. So now that I have this, let's go F3 just so we can watch what happens. You can see my scene is a little crooked. Let's hit Align and Magic. So something that I already know is a problem. Whoops, I don't want to add more lines. Let's undo and turn off Add Line. I'm going to go into, over to Trackers. So a problem I already know is here because of my earlier solves. These 3 points here, we know that they should be flat. Let's color them so that we can tell them apart later. Let's go blue, sure. So if I hit F4 and look at the points, they're not perfectly flat as you'd want them to be. And that's kind of a big no-no. We're going to manually make this perfect. So I'm going to come over to 3D. Let's go with a plane, and I'm going to make a flat surface, and we're going to drop these points onto this surface. This is going to wreak a little bit of havoc on the scale that I put here. And I'll be honest, I don't know the best workaround to this. If you happen to have a shot that isn't fully calculatable by SYNTHEYES, I don't know the best route around this, aside from add more points, but my foreground is pretty limited. So this is just you watching me cheat. So let's just, I like that these 2 points are pretty level with one another. So let's just use that as our, hey, there's our flat area, and this point's going to be projecting furthest. Because we're projecting these points, we don't want to have this scale constraint. We don't want to have the scale constraint fighting with the points that the position that we drop these points onto. So I'm just going to select our tracker, go back to our tracker room, and right click on our distance constraint here. So I'm going to right click it, and now we don't have that constraint anymore. So I'm going to hit F3. Oh, sorry, let's go F4, and let's select our blue trackers, and now we're going to drop them onto mesh. So we'll go track, drop onto mesh, and let's go ahead and hit this with a solve now. I'm going to turn on constrain. So let's hit go. Okay, so now this surface that should be flat is now solving flat. And how much did it impact our error? Our error is 0.7, and we didn't raise it by very much at all. We're doing pretty good. And you could see how everything else adjusted to hopefully be a little bit more accurate. Adding any sort of constraint into SYNTHEYES will introduce some kind of error because you're taking away SYNTHEYES' freedom. And SYNTHEYES can't calculate all types of lens distortions, so that may or may not be good for your solution, depending on how you go about it. So now that we have this solved, let's go ahead and look at our object. We're going to pretend that the scale is, we're going to pretend that it's perfect. There's really nothing you can do if your solve points are funny. In SYNTHEYES, you can't set a scale and watch the number as you live scale your scene. That's something that I would do more perfectly in Maya. But for now, that scale is close enough. That's how you do it. That's how you apply it. So now for the actual purpose of this tutorial. So we're going to be solving this object here. And I have my camera solve done. So let's take a look in the quad view and see what the object is doing in space. You can see that the frame is absolutely massive. So there's a couple ways to scale this. One way is you could scale it the same way that I scaled my camera. I selected a point here and I alt left clicked the point over there, which set a distance constraint. Now I measured this picture frame. I'm gonna show you that we can use it, but I'm gonna undo it. But I measured from here over to here. So I'll select my first point. Why am I frozen? Oh, never mind. I'll select my first point, and then I'll alt left click my second point. Now that I've done that, you can see that there's another gray, wow, this is very faint. There is a line here, I promise, that is connecting these points. So with the first point selected, I'm going to come over to trackers again, and here we have distance. Now for the frame, I measured 31.9, and now if I go F4, you can see that we have our distance constraint here, and the frame should solve to hopefully sit on this surface here. I really hope. So Shift G, yes, it did. So my measurements were not perfect, and I did have to do a funny thing to my camera solve to make the points sit in a more flat orientation. So you could see that it harmed my measurement on my frame a little bit. So that's why I'm going to undo, get rid of that distance constraint, and this is how you would manually scale it. I could go 3D, whole, and then scale, and now when I click this number here, or I think you could drag in here, yeah, you can click and drag in your views. You can find the point where your frame is at rest, like you could see in the shot the frame is not moving, and now I can scale this until my points sit on my flat surface on the window frame. Now if you hold Control, click and drag, you'll get a more refined move. So there's the frame moving hopefully pretty accurately in space. It is a little shaky at the end, but that's just, you know, pixel human error on tracking kind of stuff here. There's not much you could do about this. Ideally, all you would do is you would just zero out the animation of your object, where you can go F7 into the graph editor, open up your camera and objects, object 1, solved path, and let's just view the translations. Double click the hand so you could scale it, and I'm going to turn off the color coding just so it's easier to see. You can see where the frame is at rest. And when I let go, or stop touching it completely, it looks like about here is where we would zero out our animation. So now we have an object that's moving and then it comes and sits perfectly still. I didn't zero out the rotations, but you get the idea. I could go F7, show the rotations as well, frame them by double clicking the hand, and let's zero this out too. And now we have this. And now it's sitting still. You could see SYNTHEYES didn't like that though, because again my scales are a little bit offset from one another. There is one more method that we can use to say, hey, you points, you got to be in this one certain spot. You could select one or two or all of your points actually, and while this object is static in the shot, you can include it with your camera solve. So I'm going to include one of these points in my camera solve, which will give us a 3D point for where this frame should be, and then we could scale the 2 points together. So with this point, I'm going to go with a duplicate, and I'm going to take this tracker, move it over to camera 1. Actually, you know what? Let's undo that duplicate, because I realized when you select the tracker and then you go to change it to your other object or camera, it's going to ask if you want to clone it. So I might as well just say yes, use the clone in this case. So I'm going to go camera 1, and now with this tracker selected, we want to disable it once I start touching the frame. So I'm going to go unlock it, and the tracker direction is facing to the left. That's good because that's everything that I want to clear. So I'm going to hit E to disable all of that. E is for enable disable. Okay, now that I have this point, I could do one of two things. I could resolve my scene and have this point help my solve, or I can hit W on my keyboard or 0.8 right here and let the point give us a 0.8 solve 3D point. So it's not too good looking. So I'm actually going to go turn 0.8 off, and we're going to let it influence the solve as well. But if we look over here in the quad view, you can see what I mean. Here's our point, here's our frame point, and you can scale them a little bit better together here soon. So let's solve with that point, not in 0.8. Okay, so now that I've solved, while this point is on the frame, it's a little bit better. You can see that it's wobbling around here, but honestly there's nothing I can do because I shot this on a camera that has intense rolling shutter. But that's something that you can do. Include one of your trackers on the rigid part of your object in your camera solve. So now that we've done that, let's pretend that it's perfect. I'm sorry I can't avoid that error. So 3D, we're going to go whole and take our, let's switch over to camera 1. There we go. I'm going to turn on whole and scale is on. So now I could look over here and I can scale this until it meets our blue point there. So now when I scrub, our object is decently locked, You can see the frame's a little bit crooked, but again, I can't do much. I don't have the best solve on this camera because I chose a harder shot thinking I was being clever, but yeah, I should have made the shot a little bit easier for myself. This might be a pretty intense object solving tutorial for people, honestly. I might not call it beginner now. So we've looked at a couple methods of scale, but now let's say we had to orient the object to our frame. What do I mean by that? The same way that you have an orientation for your camera, there is a world space or an object space for your object. And by that I mean if we hit F3, so if you look at the object here, let's go into wireframe mode. If you look at the object here, there's a diamond here, and that diamond happens to be your actual object solve. Any geometry you want to apply to this frame is sitting inside of this object. So let's say this. Let's say I'm going to go to F4. There we go. I like this view a little bit cleaner. So let's say I go and make a plane, and this plane is going to represent, our picture frame. Wait, did I say I was going to add a frame? Added a plane. Did I say that? Okay, whatever. I added a plane, and we're going to go to translate, zero all of this out, and you can see that it's centered to this. Let's hide this. I don't know why that solid what came back. Let's just hide this. Actually, let's just delete this. I don't need that anymore. So wireframe, I hit the pipe key under backspace. So now that we have our object and I zeroed it out, you can see when I scrub it follows, but it's not oriented to the object at all. If I zero out the rotations as well, you could see that the space of the object is not parallel to the frame. So we want to do some orientation on this as well. So to do that, let's delete that frame for now. We can make another one in a second. Super easy. Let's go over to our lens tab again, and those lines that we did for the camera, we can also go and we can also come and add lines for our objects. So I'm going to drag a line here, and I want to make this X facing that way, Z this, no, let's go, okay, X facing this way, Y going up, and then Z coming towards us. We're not going to add any Z lines. We don't have that kind of data for this. So let's go and make sure that this point is snug right there. This point snug down there. And let's see. Let's get our parallel X point up top. And let's get our main Y line. And let's get our parallel Y line. Okay, so with that being done, I can now align this, and hopefully this diamond will be oriented to this frame. And then whatever geometry we apply, we can zero out and have it nice and parallel to everything. So I'm going to go align, and you can see the origin faced, where our two main lines intersect. That's normal. So now I can now come and add in a plane. So I'm going to go plane, magic wand, and let's just drag it in here roughly for now. And translate, we'll zero it out by right clicking, rotate, right click all that, clear it out. And you could see that the object snapped itself to the origin of the diamond over there. The diamond happens to have a weird distance from the points, which is okay for now. The align tool kind of moved everything in a funny fashion, but it doesn't matter because we're going to take this plane and let's rotate it on what, X? Nope, not that way. Y. Wait, I'm confused which way the axes run now. Okay, whatever. The second one rotated the way that I wanted, so I'm going to type in 90 here, and let's go scale. No, let's go move for now. And we'll drag it over on the X, move it on the Y. Oh, see, it's moving on the right axis on translations now. That's cool. So scale. So you can see the perspective is, let's see. The perspective is looking okay. So I don't care how big this plane is. This is just to tell these points, here's the orientation, and now we're going to constrain our corner trackers to this surface. So I'm going to just drop these on the mesh. I'm going to go track, drop on the mesh, and now we have our 4 points here. So let's go ahead and do a solve. Our constrain button is already on, and let's see. I think we're good. Let's hit go. So now that I've done that, you'll see that the object is tracking and it has a nice orientation and everything. This is kind of good enough for you to leave at this point in the solve, but just to finish it off, oh, when I say that, I mean in terms of, hey, it's moving, it's rotating, it's cool, but now we got to worry about scale. 3D, we're gonna come over to 3D and go to scale, whole. If you have constrained points like I do now, you're kind of locked out of using the distance tool. You can't really use them together as far as I know. So you can only use your projected points or a distance. So what do you do now? I'm going to manually scale this. When I talked about using a tracker on your object and also using it in your camera view, if your object so happens to be at rest in your shot at some point, you can now use this to scale, to reference for scale. So I'm going to go to 3D, whole, make sure scale is on, and pull it back. I don't remember what point is what. What point was it? Oh, it's up here. Right there. This point lines up with that one. And just due to the tracker having technically slightly different data in the camera solve, there is a slight offset, which is fine. It's so minor. You could see how far I zoomed in just to see that. And you could see our scale error from our solve error from our camera, just not having enough data to calculate. You could see we have our little shift here. Okay, so let's go about here when I let go, or when I'm not touching it, or kind of where I'm not touching it. So let's go F3 and see if this looks okay if I zero it all out. So I'm going to go scale up all my rotations and my translations. There we go. So minus, whoops. Oh, I lost my frame because I clicked in there. Let's say around here. So minus. Okay. Now please tell me this is okay. Yeah, our points aren't drifting as bad as they were. They are a little bit, honestly, but again, that's the scale of my camera. I messed that up. So I could have chosen a shot where I had a lot more data to calculate, but some shots aren't very doable in SYNTHEYES when there's rolling shutter and other distortion parameters that aren't being accounted for. This is the kind of shot where hopefully I would have gotten a lens grid, because I don't have a whole lot of foreground here to properly work with distortion as I should. So that being said, we kind of did everything major, I think. We solved our camera, we talked a little bit about scale. This was a very messy video. We did some orientation on the camera and the object. We talked a little bit about the diamond. The diamond itself is the actual object. You got to remember that. Always try to orient your object. Try to make sure you're working with your object zeroed out and just clean and nice and parallel under the diamond. If you start working at objects with like weird angles, like you've rotated the plane or you've rotated the diamond, one doesn't match the other, you're going to start having some weird issues in other software. It's very fixable in other software. You don't have to worry, but it's nice to just keep good practice. Make sure everything's nice and clean in SYNTHEYES before you let it out into the wild. So with that being said, I hope you liked this very messy tutorial. That was a bit of a struggle. How long is this? 30 minutes. That's not as bad as I thought it would be. One more thing I guess I could say is that my camera is not super perfect. So let me do a little fast tweak of that. I'm gonna go, there's a little pop here. It's popping in depth. If I go F7, take a look at the camera. Let's collapse all this. Look at camera 1. And you can see our motion here. It has that little spike that I mentioned. You can see it on the Y. Let's deselect object 1. I'll just select camera. There we go. You can see our little pop in the paths here. So I'm going to isolate that area and refine it quickly. Let's just shrink these down so I can see it a little bit better. Yeah, it's just this area I actually don't like, so not a very hard smooth. I'm going to come over to Solver, Filtering, and I'm going to maybe just smooth the distance on this one. So let's animate the strength. I'm going to go to the first frame, make the strength 0, and I'll come over to this area. I'll make it like strength of 1 close to that nick frame, and then I'll come a couple frames before, turn my strength down to 0. Okay, so now it starts out as 0, animates the 1, and now let's place a keyframe here with these points. So I'll go a couple frames after, and I'll disable, or sorry, I'll enter in 0 again. Okay, so now you can see what our strength does. It animates to strength of 1 just for that little area, and then goes away. So with that, I'm going to solve the distance. I could solve the path and smooth all of these just in the world space. I kind of only want to smooth the camera's like push in and out. Maybe. I might have to use that, but let's see. Distance, smooth, and you could see that that little X movement is there. Maybe I'll undo it, and let's undo that distance. Whoops, I went a little bit too far. There we go. I undid that path, and let's turn off distance, just go X, Y, Z, and apply. So there we go, we smoothed that out a little bit more brute force like. And with that, let's go to axis locks, position on, and make sure you do that on the first frame because this animates as well. And we're going to hit get, load in that whole path, and our solve is not going to change much, just for those couple frames where I smoothed out that little nick. Yes, so now I can hit solve, and our error has changed a little bit, which is good. Our error went from 0.79 to 0.8, which is not as big a shift as it looks. It just so happens we're at 0.79, so the 0.8 looks a little bit jarring. We're still under an average slide of 1 pixel for an HD plate. Okay, so quick watch. It's not the best smooth, but yes, we did smooth out that little area a bit. I'm happier with it. I'm not amazingly happy, but you know, little fix. I could spend much more time refining this. I could spend all day. Like normally you probably want to spend a good 3-4 hours on a shot like this, but for a tutorial, we're not going to do that. I showed you a little fix here, showed you a couple weird little things about the object there, and hopefully you are happy. Yes, so I hated recording this tutorial. I recorded this like 40-50 times. It was a nightmare. I was struggling so hard. Alright, with that being said, hopefully you enjoyed. I'm sorry I couldn't explain the solver settings if I happened to show that part of the tutorial without a disclaimer. I fluked that off. I'm not good with this. I just mess with these numbers and hope magic happens, and sometimes it does. So I'm going to close that and also close out this video. So enjoy your day. Oh my god, what an awkward closer to tutorial yet again. Why should we do that? Alright, bye. Nailed it.